Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's video explores an alternate version of events and characters in a reimagined storyline. This presentation is structured and adapted into an audiobook style format with narration and visuals to enhance the experience. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the story.
I am Ned Stark, Lord of Winterfell and Hand of the King, his hard, harsh voice carried across the plaza, and I come before you to confess my treason in the sight of gods and men. All of his time at King's Landing had come to this. He had tried, but in the end he had failed. And even now, hearing himself saying those words, a cost he had to pay to save his daughter's life, he actually felt like a traitor. Ned Stark was betraying the realm by letting a bastard sit on the Iron Throne. I betrayed the faith of my king, and the trust of my friend, Robert. Ned lied, and it sickened him. I swore to defend and protect his children, yet before his blood was cold, I plotted to depose and murder his son and seize the throne for myself. I failed you, my friend. Let the High Septon and Baelor the Beloved and the Seven bear witness to the truth of what I say. Joffrey Baratheon is the one true heir to the Iron Throne, and by the grace of all the gods, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and protector of the realm. The first stone came sailing out of the crowd and smashed into his forehead. This is how they will remember me. Blood, warm and slick, ran down his face from a deep gash across his forehead. More stones followed. One struck the gold cloak to his left. In the pulpit where the king stood beside his mother and Sansa, two of the king's guards stepped to protect the royal family with their shields. Only when the crowd calmed down did the High Septon kneel before Joffrey and his mother. Eddard didn't look at the priest. As we sin, so do we suffer, intoned the fat Septon, in a deep, swelling voice. This man has confessed his crimes in the sight of gods and men here in this holy place. The gods are just. Yet, blessed, Baelor taught us that they are also merciful. What shall be done with this traitor, your grace? 1,000 voices were screaming, traitor, they called him. Kill him, cut his head off, make him pay. His eyes darted off toward the pulpit. Not looking for the boy king, but for Sansa. There she was, smiling. She almost looked happy, as if she didn't know that everyone she knew and trusted had been slaughtered. Fat Tom and Septa Mordane, all the other Stark guards, and the steward, Valyon Poole. Like as not, Valyon's daughter and Sansa's friend, Jane, was also dead. No, she couldn't have known that. She kept on smiling, as if everything was perfect. And there was no sign of Arya. He refused to believe that his little wild girl, so much like Lyanna, had died in the bloodshed at the Tower of the Hand. In his mind he kept imagining the girl lost in the city, running from the guards in red and gold, that little sword of her right at her waist. When Joffrey waved to greet the crowd, Eddard could not look away from the boy. The sight of Robert's crown sitting atop Joffrey's golden curls made him sick. My mother bids me to let Lord Eddard take the black, and my lady Sansa begged mercy for her father. The bastard smiled with a wicked gleam in his eye. But they have soft hearts of women. So long as I am your king, treason shall never go unpunished. The jeers started again. Cerelyn, bring me his head. Even before he could understand what those words meant, Eddard sought Sansa in the chaos. The smile had disappeared on the girl's lips. All the confidence was gone, her childhood dreams crushed with just a few short words. Eddard could not hear her among the cries that filled the plaza, but the movement of her lips was clear enough. Joffrey, please, stop. Stop it. But the boy king was not listening. With a dangerous glint in his eyes, the king was actually ignoring everyone. The queen was whispering something in his ear, speaking quickly, her brow furrowed with worry. Lord Varys was near too, a grave look on his face. At that moment, Eddard knew it was the end. When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. Cersei had said to him, he should have known that being allowed to live, as Varys had promised he would be, was another lie. Yaxley approached with his boots gleaming in the autumn sun. Ice, the Valyrian steel greatsword that had belonged to House Stark for centuries, was in his hands. They are beheading me with my own sword, Ned realized, and that was not the most hurtful thought that crossed his mind at the moment. It was the fact that ice would probably never reach the hands of the future Lord of Winterfell. No, Robb. His heir ravaging the Riverlands caught up in the mess started by the Lannisters. He could only hope that the boy could and would make peace with the throne. Cat would advise him to do so. even if she wanted revenge more than anyone else. How could she support his decision to go to war? He was only 14 years old. She would never allow him. They are still children, all of them. What would happen to Arya? Most likely the Gold Cloaks would find her. She would be confined to a cell next to Sansa, and both of them used to negotiate peace with Robb. And what would the younger boys think? He almost could see the despair in Bran and Rickon's eyes, believing their father was beheaded like a traitor. And there is Jon, of course. He will never forgive me. Since Varys had told him that the crown would allow him to take the black, he had found little consolation in that idea. At least he would see the boy. He could even tell him about his mother, since Robert was now dead. But not anymore. Eddard was going to die and take the truth about Jon to the grave. So lost in his last thoughts, he didn't notice that the crowd had grown silent. Saxling was right next to him, the smoky blade of ice gleaming at the sun. Gulping, he looked over his shoulder. Something was happening in the pulpit. The queen was definitely not happy. Her blonde hair was disheveled, and she had an unusual glint in her eyes. Fear. Digging her nails into Joffrey's arm, she kept whispering something to him. Varys was right behind her, more pale than usual. After listening, the king answered aggressively. For a second or two, Eddard thought that he might actually strike his mother. What would that look like in the eyes of the city? But the queen apparently knew how to control her son. Sir Ellen, hold, Cersei ordered, her eyes still locked with Joffrey's. The executioner stopped right in front of Eddard, ready to swing the sword. Someone in the crowd protested, yelling, "Kill him and be done with it," but no one else encouraged that thought. All of them were still looking at Cersei Lannister. The queen then made a gesture to Lord Varys, and the eunuch stepped up and showed something to the king. A little bit of parchment. Whatever it said, it was enough to change Joffrey's mind. With his face twisted with anger, the king yelled for the entire plaza to hear. "Seriously, your services will be not necessary after all. As my mother just reminded me, sometimes showing mercy to a criminal is a worse punishment than death, and shedding blood so early in my reign is not a good omen for the future." The boy didn't mean one word. Ned knew it. His eyes fell on Eddard Stark one last time, filled with something more than hate. Madness. "Someone take them traitor back to the black cells. He leaves for the wall tomorrow." At that moment, Sansa fainted right beside the queen, taken by all the emotions of the day. Sansa Clegane, with his new white cloak, caught her before she hit the ground. Two guards grabbed a surprised Ned Stark by the shoulders. He could barely believe it. He had escaped death by a whisker. Ned Stark waited in the dark. He knew someone would come for him soon. Maybe Varys, again masked as Rugen the Gatherer. Grandmaster Pycelle was also a possibility. The old man liked to poke his nose in where it was not needed, and was Cersei Lannister's creature, and even the wicked little finger could make an appearance to gloat of his victory. But who he really needed to see was Sansa before leaving to the north. The girl would soon be living all alone in a den of lions, and she has to find Arya, he thought. He knew the girls had never been able to stand each other, but they were sisters. As long as they were at each other's side, they would not be alone. If Sansa's marriage could not be prevented, then the girl would need someone strong beside her. What better choice than a Stark who could actually use a sword? But she will not marry that monster. A part of him still believed, hoped even, that the boy king would call off the wedding. Later that day, when a guard brought him some bread and water, Ned realized for the first time how lucky he was to be alive. He saw everything with different eyes now, as if he had been reborn. The moldy bread tasted like one of Winterfell's pies, and the spoiled water better than any Dornish wine he had ever tried. He was alive, bound to go to the wall, but alive. He had to believe that something waited for him in the future. He could still make something of his life beside Jon and Benjen. Maybe in time he could even receive leave from the Lord Commander to visit Winterfell for a night or two. No, Castle Black will be my home soon, he remembered. Not Winterfell. It would not be easy to adjust to that new life. Not that he was disturbed by the fact that he was no longer Lord of Winterfell. In truth, he believed Robb would do well ruling the North. The Umbers, the Karstarks, the Mormonts, the Boltons, and all the other houses would stand behind him. Not to mention Catelyn and Maester Luwin, always ready to give him guidance, just as they'd given it to Ned when he needed it most. No, what was worrying him was the vows he would have to make to the Night's Watch. Taking the Black meant leaving his family behind. How could he do that, knowing that all of them were so close to him? But all of us are alive, he said to himself. That is all that matters. A light flicked outside his cell, making him flinch. Covering his eyes with his hand, Ned looked towards the door as it opened. A guard appeared, holding a torch, and standing right behind him was the Queen Regent, Cersei Lannister herself. The red dress she was wearing at Baelor's had been taken off in favor of a gray one. Still managing to maintain a regal look, Cersei was clutching a handkerchief under her nose to keep away the smell of piss and shit. "Your Grace, pardon me if I don't bow," he said, when she stopped right in front of him. He tugged the chains so they could rattle. "I'm not in a good place to do so." "I don't think that will be necessary, Lord Stark," she replied coldly, looking around with disgust in her eyes. Ned smirked in the shadows, though he was slightly confused. Why had she come down all the way from Maker's Holdfast? Why hadn't she sent one of her lackeys? "I suppose you know why I'm here," she continued, as if reading his mind. Even from his place on the wet and soiled ground, Eddard could almost taste the smell of roses coming from her. So pungent was her perfume. Clearly nervous, the guard stood in the corridor, holding the torch and awaiting orders. "I confess, I don't, Your Grace," he admitted. "But now that you are here, I have a plea to make. You must allow one more act of mercy before I make my way to the north." "Let me see my daughter." "Which one?" she interrupted calmly, though Ned sensed the victory in her tone. "So they have found Arya. Your savage daughter was found at Flea Bottom this afternoon by one of Varys's little birds," Cersei continued, as if she could read Ned's mind, clearly enjoying herself. "It seems the girl was with a man of the Night's Watch, Yoren. I think his name was. Apparently the fool was trying to smuggle her out of the city with other men bound for the Wall. I suppose he was going to try to sell the girl to your wife as soon as he reached River Run, but the City Watch stopped him in time. The girl is safe in the Red Keep, and the man was beheaded for treason not 1 hour ago. It seems the king has already forgotten that nonsense about not shedding blood." "How is Arya?" Ned managed to ask. "Strong enough to kick one of my guards and attempt an escape," she said disdainfully. "You have a true little wolf there, Lord Stark. I have to give you that." "Yes, that sounds like Arya. A wolf that would do better in the north, don't you agree?" The chains rattled in the dark as Ned moved, lifting his head to look at the Queen. Was she being honest? Or just cruel? He clenched his hands. How much could a man take? "Yes, I agree." He knew that the Queen wanted to hear those words. Make him beg for his daughter. After making the handkerchief disappear gracefully into one of the sleeves of her dress, Cersei clasped her hands and looked at him seriously. "The girl can go home." Surprisingly, she seemed honest, "but only if you help the crown first. The game continues. I'm in chains, Your Grace. I think I will not be able to do much for the crown." "Oh, but you can," insisted Cersei, once again with a calm voice. "My father says that some wars can be won with quills and ravens instead of swords and spears. I think we can work together to prove that, don't you think?" "You want me to write to my son," he realized, before understanding that it could not be just that. "Sometimes our children need some guidance," she said, clearly referring to her quarrel with Joffrey at the steps of the Great Sept. "My son, for instance, doesn't know yet how to rule this kingdom, and he doesn't know how to play the Game of Thrones," Ned interrupted, bolder than he expected to be. "The same game that can only end in death or victory, as you once told me." "It sounds like I'm threatening the king. Are you trying to say that you want to die, Lord Stark?" Cersei asked coldly. "I saved your life today. Don't make me regret that decision." "You saved your son's life," Eddard corrected her. "If I had died today, your son would have brought war to Westeros, the fury of the Starks, of the Tullys, and maybe even that of the Vale. In less than a year, Joffrey would have been king of a broken kingdom. This is if he managed to keep the Iron Throne until then. You know that, and that's why you are here. You need me to secure the realm for your son. Your father is losing against Robb in the Riverlands. The bloodshed has no end in sight." Even in the shadows, he could see the smirk on Cersei's lips, though she wore it like a mask to hide her fear that he was right. "Looks like you have learned a thing or another about this game." She didn't give him time to answer. "And yes, you are right. Your son is at this moment marching on King's Landing. I don't know what he hopes to achieve by raiding our walls and causing mayhem in the Riverlands, but that is now unnecessary. You've confessed your crime and will soon take the black. No one else has to die. You can convince your son to lay down his weapons, swear his loyalty to my son, and return to that freezing hellhole you call home. As a gesture of goodwill, the king will take Lady Sansa as his wife and will allow Lady Arya to go home." The king will take Sansa as his wife. "Your son still wants to marry Sansa?" He swallowed the bitter taste of those words before continuing. The daughter of a traitor? He appreciates the girl, Lord Stark, replied Cersei, although she surely didn't truly believe that. And Robert wanted this marriage to happen. Baratheons and Starks united at last. Robert was a fool. And your son is no Baratheon. My wife will want to take home both our daughters. Yes, Catelyn would want that. I think I could convince Robb to agree to this marriage. But it would help if Sansa could return to Winterfell for a year or two. They need to mend their wounds. Time spent together. As a family. He had almost forgot that he wouldn't be at Winterfell with them. He would not guide Robb in the hard times. Would not embrace Sansa every time she cried in fear of the loveless marriage she was bound to. Would not watch Arya in her dance lessons ever again. See Bran recovering from his fall. Watch Rickon grow until he was as tall as Ned. And then there was Cat. The thought of her in the glass gardens caused him so much pain. The thought of her alone caused him even more. A southern lady frozen in an eternal winter. The tears pricked behind his eyes. She didn't deserve that. He bowed his head to hide any sign of weakness. Take Sansa back to the north? Joffrey will never allow it. Cersei replied after considering the matter for a few seconds. Sansa has to remain in King's Landing. Not only to marry Joffrey and become queen, but to make sure that Robb behaves. That was the true purpose of that marriage. There was nothing to be done. Sansa had to pay for all her family, and the crown on her head would not change that. Whatever he said now would not change that. If that couldn't be avoided, Ned could at least try to do one last thing for his eldest daughter. I understand, he said, remembering how Theon Greyjoy was still a hostage in his care for the crimes committed by his father. And eventually Robb will understand too. But for this to work out, you will have to meet his terms. And what terms do you have in mind? First of all, the Iron Throne has to handle this mess in the Riverlands with justice. I know that my wife should not have taken the Empress prisoner. That was a mistake, but it was not her who started pillaging all those villages in the Trident. You know who it was, Gregor Clegane. Robb and the Riverlords will demand justice, Ned pressed, and the Iron Throne must give them that to restore peace to the Seven Kingdoms. Real justice. I will do my best to make that work, Lord Stark. Cersei was clearly not comfortable with that. Even if they didn't acknowledge it, they both knew that her father was the mastermind behind the attacks. Would Joffrey really punish his grandfather? It would never happen. But at the least Eddard had to try. I will make sure that the culprits receive what they deserve once your son and my father put down their swords. Promises for Cersei Lannister were only words, but for now it would be enough. He had more important demands in mind. If my daughter is to be queen, she will need her mother's support. Ned continued, it would be a relief for both Sansa and Catelyn. He was depriving the other children of their mother, but they were all safe behind the walls of Winterfell. Sansa wasn't, and would never be again. Lady Catelyn will be welcomed at court. I think Lord Baelish will be pleased to see her. No, he will not. Ned would make sure Catelyn knew the part Littlefinger had played in his downfall. My son will also send an escort with my wife, Eddard continued, looking the queen in the eye. He could almost hear the Umbers, the Karstarks, and the Mormonts fighting each other for a place in the Queen's Guard. Those men shall later be installed at court to grant protection to their future queen. Cersei wouldn't like that. Warriors from the north roaming through the Red Keep, that would certainly be hard to swallow. There is no need for that. The King's Guard will protect Sansa. They will not protect her from the wicked mind of your son. Robb will not rest until he knows that his sister and mother are guarded by his best men. Your Grace. Would you rest if your brother was at the hands of your enemy? Somehow, the Queen seemed disturbed by that answer. She stood silent for a few seconds, and when she spoke, her voice trembled. Has Lord Yerys paid you a visit today? I'm afraid not. That was an odd question. More strange than that was the fear glinting again at Cersei's eyes. My brother is currently a hostage of your son, Cersei revealed, making an effort to keep her voice strong. Lord Varys received a message right before you were taken to the Great Sept. It seems there was a battle 3 nights ago at the Whispering Wood. Your son's army defeated the troops of my father, and it seems that they have captured Yami. So she is not doing this for the realm, he finally understood. The Queen was not acting out of mercy or thinking about power moves. She has saved me to save her brother, to save her lover. You have nothing to fear, Ned assured her, playing her game. I will write to Robb when given a chance. And make sure the Kingslayer is treated honorably, and you can have your brother back very soon. I promise, but only if you agree with all the terms I proposed. He considered insisting on calling off Sansa's wedding, but Cersei would not go so far to save her brother. Giving away Sansa would be too dangerous for the crown. They needed a hostage of their own to secure peace. "I will present your terms to my son," she answered, without a shred of shame. Her incestuous relationship was condemned by gods and men. But there she was, proudly proclaiming her love for the man with whom she had shared a womb. "And you will write to your son. I have arranged a small room for you in the Red Keep. You will be there within the hour, and there you can find anything you need to write to the young wolf. Then at dawn you will make your way to the north. Lady Arya will accompany you until you reach Winterfell." "Very well, your grace." He still hated that woman, and how viciously she had plotted to destroy Robert's legacy. But a part of him admired her. She reminded him of Catelyn, maybe a little more cruel, but deep down acting only out of love for her family. "Then there is nothing more to say, Lord Stark. I wish you safe travels." When she turned to leave, Ned stretched an arm, catching the hem of her dress. Annoyed, Cersei turned to look at him one last time. "You were wrong, your grace. There is a middle ground in this bloody game after all." The queen actually laughed at him. "No, there isn't." She looked at him from top to bottom, his clothes stained and all covered in piss and shit. "You don't need to die to be dead. Sansa." 6 years later, year 35 AC, Queen Sansa Baratheon shivered in her black fur cloak. After 5 years of autumn, the winter had finally come. A soft cloak of snow covered King's Landing like it did at Winterfell in the coldest day of summer. Winterfell, could she still call it home after all these years? Looking through the window of her litter, she saw the gloomy towers of the Red Keep looming in the distance. That was her home now, right on top of Egain's Hill. Those high towers which once had made her believe in old Nan's tales. Now, when she looked to the castle from afar, she could only see spears dripping blood. "Why did he smell so bad?" Edwyle asked, curious as usual. He had his eyes locked on the small wooden deer that Lord Tyrion Lannister had just given him. Sansa closed the curtains of the litter and managed to bring a smile to her lips. "Because, my little prince, that's what happens when you die." "But mother, I don't want to smell bad when I die," the child protested, pouting. The toy slipped through his fingers, falling to the floor. The litter advanced restlessly through the city. Snow was falling softly all around them as if the gods themselves were in mourning for the late hand. The toll of the bells rolled across the land, reminding the city that it was a sad day. "What a silly thing to say, Ed. You won't be dead for many years," Sansa replied, leaning to catch the toy. Pain stabbed her in the legs, making her wince. The throbbing was getting worse. She realized she was eager for her chamber, her mother's touch, and a glass of mulled wine. That would certainly help. She quickly returned the wooden deer to the prince's hands. Looking at him, Sansa sometimes wondered how she and Joffrey were able to make something so perfect. It had certainly not been easy for her. That long year trying to get pregnant would haunt her forever. At that time, she had still believed she could make Joff happy. Every day trying to convince him she was not her father. But soon she found out that Joff relished pain, not in himself, but in others. By the look on his face, it was obvious that he felt something like pleasure watching others suffering, screaming, pleading for mercy. That's why Sir Meryn Trant had to beat her every time the king wanted to bed her. There, closed in the king's quarters, even her queen's guard couldn't do anything for her. But it was a necessary price to get pregnant. It was the only way for Joff to harden and enter her. Instead of withering in agony, losing her mind, and becoming a sad, broken queen with no purpose, she was making an effort to be the opposite. It was certainly not easy. Her mother helped her, as did her queen's guard. At the city, she knew there were those who already called her the Wolf Queen. Even being a minority, at least there was one person out there calling her something that wasn't her other name, the Turncoat Queen. The Wolf Queen didn't believe in love and all those fairy tales. She was aware that her marriage was based upon a treaty to buy Robb's peace. There was nothing more than that. And how could she love or even respect a husband that treated her like a broodmare to bed and beat at his convenience? That's why, even though her mother disapproved, she allowed Joffrey to have his whores. At least they were paid to be beaten. Fortunately, since Edwyle's birth, the king had started visiting her bed less often. During the last year, he started coming to her once in a month to fulfill his husbandly duty. They saw each other at court and were good faking their happiness during banquets, tournaments, and audiences at the throne room. But that was it. The king didn't even have an interest in his son. He didn't know how Edwyle's lessons were going with Maester Olmar, or how talented he was at riding horses. The prince, however, didn't seem to mind. In fact, Sansa suspected her son was afraid of the man he had to call father. Edwyle smiled teasingly to his mother, realizing he was being watched. Her mother, Lady Catelyn, believed she was protecting the boy too much. But was she really? She didn't want the future king of the Seven Kingdoms to grow up with his head full of illusions or to be a monster like his father. She had to make sure that wouldn't happen. Everything in her reign could fail. But not her son. Will the bells keep tolling during the night, Mother? I think I'll have trouble sleeping if they do. Sansa shook her head. Only until your great-grandfather's body leaves the city. They had been at the Great Sept since morning beside the Dowager Queen, and all the other Lannisters. Joff, she had noted, hadn't appeared to pay a last tribute to his grandfather. That certainly wouldn't look good for him. Even Cersei seemed unhappy with his absence. After all, Tywin Lannister, rotting at the Sept since last week, was the reason why the king was still on the throne. The victory at the Blackwater 6 years ago was now nothing more than a distant memory. Edwyle would only know about it through Maester Omar's lessons and Joff's lies. The king insisted on telling all how he had cut a big red smile on Stannis' lips, ear to ear. He always left out the part where he'd only found Stannis' corpse after the battle was done. But on a dark night, when she closed her eyes, Sansa could still see the green flames dancing in the bay. The ships engulfed in fire and the burning banner of Stannis Baratheon actually burning. At first, when she had seen the flames from Aker's holdfast, she thought that the battle was lost. After all, didn't Stannis have a red priestess with him, a woman who could control flames and murder with shadows? However, it seemed the woman was not with the Pretender's fleet. The imp who she had learned to cherish in these long years had come with the genius idea of using wildfire. That had been enough to detain Stannis until an army of Lannisters, Tyrells, and Starks appeared at the gates to put an end to the rebellion. That was the last time that she had seen Robb. She wrote to him once in a while asking about Bran and Rickon and his Frey wife, but the cold answers she received were proof enough that her brother, even after all this time, hadn't accepted what had come of her. Not that he felt betrayed to see her sister sharing a bed with a monster, but because he had been forced to leave her in Joffrey's claws. Making peace with the Iron Throne had not been easy. She had learned only 2 years ago, by the lips of Cersei herself, that further conflict had been avoided only thanks to a secret treaty she had made with her father in the Black Cells. According to the Dowager Queen, the war could have gone on if Robb and Joff had not agreed to the terms arranged by Sansa's father. What would have happened then? At last, the litter stopped at the Red Keep's gate. "Would you like to forego your lessons today, Edwyle?" the Queen asked, looking at her son. He was more Lannister than Stark. Lannister? Yes. Long was the time when she believed that Joffrey had a drop of Baratheon blood in his veins. Edwyle's hair was golden, the very same color as all the other Lannisters. His eyes, however, were not the cold green of the king's, but the same vivid blue as her own. Almost 4 years old, he was a little plump, with large cheeks and a crooked smile, as a child should be at his age. I have lemon cakes, and Grandmother Cat can tell you a story about the Blackfish again. The prince didn't need to hear more to be convinced. After descending from the litter, she gave her hand to the child and made her way through the corridors. The keep was unusually silent, since a great number of nobles were still gathering at the Great Sept. She had returned to the castle early, excusing herself from the funeral, saying that the prince was tired when in fact she was the one dying of exhaustion. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Sir Wendell Manderly, one of her guards, following at a distance, his hand on the hilt of the great sword at his waist. Sir Billan Swan of the King's Guard kept him company. Her chambers at Maegor's Holdfast stood between Joffrey's and Edwyle's. At the moment, the royal apartments were inhabited by her mother, who slept in a small bedroom, and young Prince Tommen, who was often out of the city. The Dowager Queen had recently changed to chambers next to the White Sword Tower. How convenient! Once in a while, they received honorable guests, usually Lannister relatives like Uncle Kevin and his wife, that were installed in one of the vacant rooms. A guard standing in the corridor opened the door to her chambers. She was received immediately by one of her handmaids, a distant cousin of the Lannisters, Jane Westerling. "Your Grace," greeted the girl, helping her undress the black fur. The chamber was warm thanks to a fire burning in the fireplace. The windows were closed and fogged, the snow building up on the ledge. "How was the ceremony?" "Tedious, crowded, and smelly." "Sad," she answered instead, with a half-smile. "Lord Tywin was a great man," replied Jane very gently. Indeed, he was. Sansa had to be careful around Jane. The girl was one of Cersei's spies. "Where is Lady Catelyn?" Jane, who was now helping the prince undress his coat, made a curious face. "Your lady mother is in the king's solar, your grace," she replied quickly. A smile was brewing behind her lips. Lady Olenna Tyrell is keeping her company. Sansa's surprise was reflected in her eyes even before she could control her emotions. Lady Olenna had arrived from Highgarden to meet with her granddaughter a week ago, but had not yet paid a visit to the Queen. The old woman had also not come to the Great Sept to pay her tributes to Tywin Lannister. What could she want now? Drip some venom, I suppose, thought Sansa. The Tyrell matriarch could at least have chosen a more appropriate occasion. "Very well," she replied, gravely. "Yet a while, my dear, you'll have to wait with Jane in your chambers. She will bring all the lemon cakes you want." The prince sniffed and again pouted like a little child. "Why can't I come? I want my story." "I know a couple of stories, your grace," Jane intervened, giving her hand to the prince. Sansa frowned, hearing those words. What kind of tales had Janeson in mind? But she didn't waste her time arguing. Kissing the prince goodbye, she stepped towards the solar, left and right. The guards who usually accompanied Lady Olenna everywhere she went stood outside the doors with Rebecca Glover. The three of them bowed when they saw her. Jock's Solar was a gloomy place, especially now that winter had come. It was a round room with a great fireplace and a wide window facing the river. All the walls were bare, save for one from which hung a tapestry with the king's sigil. In the center stood a table where Sansa usually dined with Edwyle, her mother, and important guests. At the moment, it was filled with fruit, lemon cakes, tea, and a jug of mulled wine. It seemed Lady Olenna was doing all the talking. The woman must be almost as old man, yet she had the mind of a young maester. She had even survived her son, who had died last year with a disease of the bowels. Wearing a long coat with flowery patterns and woolen scarfs all over her neck and head, the Queen of Thorns seemed a little ball of blue and green cloth. Lady Catelyn sat with her back to the window, nodding her head while listening to Olenna. She was evidently tired, still recovering from the cold she had caught last month. That was the reason why she had not come to the Great Sept. Maester Olmar didn't want her to leave the castle for a few more days. Her hair, now with a few traces of silver, was tied up in a braid that fell behind her back. As usual, she wore black to mourn the husband who was now bound to serve the kingdom until his last days. And last we heard about Loras, we learnt that he had joined mercenaries in Essos. Can you believe it? I don't know what happened to the boy. The Knight of Flowers serving as a sellsword. Ah! It's an embarrassment. The words kept coming out of Lady Olenna's mouth. The old woman was completely unaware that her queen was now standing at the door. It was Catelyn who first saw Sansa. Your Grace. She got up, her head inclined in reverence. Even now, it was strange seeing her mother being so different. But as Lady Stark kept reminding her, it was of paramount importance to show respect to the Queen every time a stranger was in the room, no matter if it was one of her handmaids or her own mother. Or it seemed, the Dowager Lady of Highgarden, the Queen of Thorns, took her time getting up. When she did, her lips curled in a wicked smile. Her keen eyes, not without a certain hunger, examined Sansa's breasts and waist. Motherhood has not yet taken a burden on you. Lady Catelyn opened her eyes, caught by surprise with that inappropriate comment. Sansa, however, knew best. After dealing with Olenna Tyrell in the last few years, she now understood her strategy. Cause distress. A little bit of embarrassment, and then use the weakness to get what she wanted. Instead of falling in that trap like a wolf pup, the Queen smiled with amusement. It's good to see you again, Lady Olenna. The three of them knew it was a lie, especially now that the Tyrells and Starks were at an awkward situation. When Lord Wrynsley had murdered by some kind of blood magic performed by Stannis' sorceress, the Tyrells had sought an alliance with the Iron Throne. To seal the deal, Wrynsley's widow, Lady Margaery, was promised to Tommen and moved to court. But since the boy had been only 8 years old at the time, it was agreed that they would wait a few years to perform the ceremony. In the meanwhile, the Tyrells swore that Margaery was still a maid, that Wrynsley had never consummated their marriage, and that the late pretender actually preferred the company of men. But Lady Margaery wasn't a maid anymore. That rose had already been plucked from the bush. It was known in all 7 kingdoms that the Tyrell girl was bedding Joff. They didn't even make an effort to hide their liaison, strolling at times in Margaery's holdfast right in front of Sansa. Garrus reported that they also had a hideout right outside the city where they since met for whole weeks. Sansa was not disturbed by that. Long gone were the days when she would cry because her husband was not loyal. As she kept on saying to her mother, she was queen, no matter how Lady Margaery hoarded herself up to Joffrey's lap. Soon the affair would be over. Now that Tommen was 14 years old, he would wed the Tyrell whore. The wedding would take place in a few months, and then the happy couple would leave for Tommen's new seat at Storm's End. That game from the Tyrells would then be at an end. "What brings you here, Lady Olenna?" she asked, after a boring conversation about how the cold winds were damaging the harvests in the Reach and affecting their economy. "Family affairs, Your Grace," the Queen of Thorns answered before taking a small bite of lemon cake. She was slowly chewing, keeping Sansa waiting. Knowing that Olenna was teasing her daughter purposely, Catelyn advanced to explain what the old woman meant by those words. "Lady Olenna is looking for a bride?" Sansa nodded. A bride? She was not expecting that. "I see," she said, not willing to betray her curious. "My grandson Wellis is still unmarried," Olenna explained, her mouth at last empty. "And that fool who married my son does nothing to find a suitable marriage to the boy. Stupid Hightower. Can you believe that she passes her days crying in a corner, missing her husband as if he was a great man? All of us know he was a fool with really bad bowels. He died shitting himself. How can she miss that?" Sansa couldn't hold back a smile. "And so the burden of finding a match for Lord Willis has fallen to you, has it?" "Yes, I'm afraid so," Olenna confirmed. "That's why I'm here, Your Grace. I believe the time has come to bond our houses. An alliance between houses Stark and Tyrell could be use in the long winter that is upon us. I hear that you have good wool in the north, and gods know we shall need it. The Reach will freeze this winter, believe me. In exchange, we could negotiate a good price for vegetables, sprouts, and all that crap we plant in our lands. That would be useful to rob." The North was going through hard times. Besides the terrible news of the Greyjoys' rebellion on the west coast, there were strange rumors coming from beyond the wall. Crops to help support the winter would be more than welcome. However, when Sansa exchanged a glance with her mother, she realized how near she was to pricking her finger in one of Olenna's thorns. There was something else behind this proposal. For starters, how would Joff and the Lannisters see that alliance? They would think we were plotting something, the king's wife and mistress side by side against him. Yes, her mother should be thinking the same. "That is a generous offer, Lady Olenna," Sansa started, carefully. Olenna nodded with her friendly smile back on her lips. "But I'm afraid I can't make a marriage arrangement on behalf of House Stark. My brother, however—" "Nonsense," said Olenna, making a quick gesture with her hand. "You can marry off whoever you want in your family. It's one of the perks of being queen." "Now she is making a child of me," thought Sansa, feeling frustration boil in her chest. "I know what I can do, Lady Olenna," she replied, losing her nerve. Beneath the table, her mother's hand clutched her knee, reminding her of who she was. The Wolf Queen, and all that came with it. "But I wouldn't feel comfortable interfering with my brother's plans. And besides, who from our family could marry your grandson? I only have a sister, and she is promised to one of Lord Frey's grandsons. And even that Frey has to wait." Arya was not ready for marriage, if she ever would be. According to a letter Mother had received a few months ago, her sister was traveling in the Narrow Sea with Bran, Rickon, and that strange friend of hers that now worked at Winterfell as a blacksmith. "Walder Frey?" Olenna mocked with a laugh. "I thought the man was dead." "Oh, he is very much alive, just like you. Unfortunately for the rest of him. Well, you can break that stupid deal your brother made with him." Catelyn stirred in her chair. "I made that stupid deal, Lady Olenna. Could you be more respectful? A stupid deal it was. 2 marriages for a bridge. You only used once? It seems to me it was a very poor bargain for the Starks. And after all, the new Lady of Winterfell is a Frey. Old Walder doesn't need to reinforce his alliance with the Starks." "At the time, it looked like a fair price," Catelyn argued, definitely losing her patience. Her cheeks were now getting red. "Because of that bloody bridge we caught the Kingslayer at the Whispering Wood." "Yes, you did. But then you delivered him to his sister. She talks like that was an error." Sansa's eyes flickered toward her mother. This conversation was getting out of hand. "Enough," she ordered, slamming a hand in the table. The cutlery rattled loudly and an apple fell from the fruit bowl, rolling along the tabletop. The 2 women fell silent, looking challengingly to one another. "Lady Olenna, I will not break ties with houses that helped us in times of need. I'm sorry, but there will be no Stark match with House Tyrell in the near future. If you wish, you can write to my brother. I'm sure he can find a bride from a good northern family that is willing to marry your grandson. It's all I can offer." Lady Olenna sniffled, the smile gone. Caressing her wrinkled throat with her index finger, she reflected for a few moments, considering Then she shook her head and got up of her chair. It appears this was a waste of time. What a pity, she mumbled, almost in a whisper. I must return to my bedchamber, Your Grace. I suppose my granddaughter must have arrived from her ride with the Cid in Majesty by now. Will you excuse me? But before Sansa could answer, the old lady was already marching up out of the solar. Oh! The old crone stopped at the door and turned her head. Give my regards to your sister when you see her again. After a few seconds, the door closed, and mother and daughter were finally alone. What did she mean by that? Catelyn asked as soon as the door closed. Sansa shrugged, tired. Nothing, I suppose. She must be losing her mind. Maybe she is, Catelyn answered doubtfully. Sansa, I don't like this. An alliance with the North, it doesn't make sense. The queen grabbed a jug of wine and poured herself a glass. Don't fret, mother. I'm not worried. You should be. She may be an old woman, but she is clever, and she is playing with you. The way she spoke about how we released the Kingslayer to make peace with the throne, it made me think she actually wished that Robb hadn't stopped until every Lannister was dead. Lady Olenna is old, mother. She truly didn't know how serious her words were. What if she did know? Sansa. What if the Tyrells are conspiring against the throne and want us at their side? A marriage with a Stark? Well, it looks suspicious to me. Catelyn gulped, fear and something else glinting in her eyes. You should denounce her. Mother, you sound like a madwoman, Sansa replied, slightly irritated. She balanced her glass between her fingers, knowing that her mother was now rigid as she ever was when Sansa spoke to her that way. What would the Tyrells gain from a rebellion against Joffrey? They don't need that. They are already thriving. Besides, if they are plotting something now, it is merely who they will try to elect as Hand of the King. And I have, in fact, surprisingly news about that. Garland Tyrell's in the city, paying his tribute to the Lannisters at the Great Sept. Garland? Catelyn asked after a few moments of silence. When did he arrive? A few hours ago, with a small party of Tyrell men, Sansa said, smiling. This proves that we were wrong. Lady Marjorie will try to convince Joffrey to make Garland his hand instead of Willis. And if the rumors are right, the Lord of Highgarden takes after his father as a fool. Willis would have been a threat, but Garland we can manage. He is a Tyrell regardless of intelligence. It would be best for you if there were no roses in the Hand's Tower. Catelyn started rubbing her forehead. You have to make a clever move. Who could she suggest to Joffrey, considering that he was willing to hear her? Her husband would never consider a Northman for the position, or a lord sworn to House Tully. Anyone coming from beyond the northern border of the Crown Lands was a threat in his eyes. I think I will support for Kevin Lannister, she replied after a few seconds. Catelyn was not surprised. Cersei will want her uncle as Hand. We would do better supporting the Lannisters, and I truly think Joffrey would choose his uncle above a scented lord from the Reach. Besides, for a change, we could actually strengthen our relationship with Cersei. I believe she mistrusts the Tyrells as much as we do. Catelyn laid her warm hand on Sansa's shoulder. Yes, I think it's the right move. Her eyes locked again on Sansa's. But promise me you will keep vigilant around the Tyrells. Ask Lord Varys for some insight. Soon, mother, she promised. Not actually listening to her anymore. Since Marjorie's affair with Joff, Catelyn had grown obsessed with who could be plotting what, and saw conspiracy in every shadow. She insisted that Sansa should make Joffrey put a stop to the affair before he fathered a bastard son. Lady Catelyn had even insisted that Sansa must get pregnant again to show her value as Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, and assure another heir to the crown. She said those words with a heavy heart, knowing what Sansa had suffered to conceive little Edwyle, but she also feared for her daughter's future. Can you rub my feet, mother? Catelyn smiled. Are you having cramps again? Sansa nodded. Without hesitating, Catelyn got up and knelt at her daughter's feet. Gently, she helped the queen removing her boots and her long wool stockings. As if she was a talented healer, she then began massaging Sansa's feet. The Wolf Queen was in that moment no more than a girl moaning with relief as the pain in her legs slowly started to disappear. You will show soon, Sansa. Catelyn's voice was soft and tender while looking up to her daughter's face. A few more weeks and the court will notice that you are expecting again. You may have even less time if one of your handmaids notices that your moonblood is not coming. Yes, I know, she replied. I will dine with Joff in a day or two to tell him about the child. I think he might be in a good mood after receiving the news, thus more willing to hear me about the Hand. Sansa moaned again with relief. The cramps in her feet and legs were apparently a problem that affected every Tully woman during pregnancy. At that moment, someone knocked at the door, startling both of them. Sansa kicked her boots and stockings under the table and covered her bared feet with the hem of her black dress. Catelyn, in the meanwhile, recomposed herself and washed her hands in a basin that stood next to a window. "Who is it?" asked Sansa, hoping it was not another Tyrell. Robia Glover peeped into the solar. "Your Grace, I'm sorry to disturb you, but Sarah Wendell caught a man trying to sneak into the keep through the kitchens. The man is armed and claims to be your relative, even though he refuses to give his name. Should I send him away, or would you like to take a look at him? I personally don't recognize him, but he looks a Northman." Catelyn was curious. "A relative?" she asked, advancing toward the door with a quick step. "Let me see this man." Without saying another word, Catelyn and Sir Robert Glover left Sansa alone. The Queen used those few minutes to put on her boots again. Who could be that mysterious relative outside door? She groaned, tired and without the patience to receive guests. The day had been long, and the weeks ahead would be longer. Only the gods knew how quickly she would trade King's Landing for her peaceful and silent room at Winterfell. Instead, she would have to change her dress to dine with the Lannisters. A last dinner to mourn Tywin Lannister would be held at the hall later, and her presence, being the Queen, was expected. Winterfell. Lately, she kept thinking of her home and how Edwyle would like to run among the weirwood, to climb the steps of the broken tower and ride in the woods with his uncles. Her hands fell to her lap and her fingers softly caressed her growing belly. There was a reason why the baby was still a secret. Even Lady Catelyn didn't know why, believing that she was saving to use the news at the right moment. Truth was that there was a small possibility that the child was not from the king. She had considered until last week taking a potion or a tea to make the child go, but she couldn't do it. She wanted that child, even if it was dangerous to give birth to a bastard. Her daydream ended when the door opened to let Lady Catelyn in, followed by a tall, slim man dressed in a black coat. She didn't recognize the man at a first glance. Maybe it is a distant cousin begging for a favor, but then, when she saw the beaming smile on her mother's lips and the tears sliding down her face, Sansa knew she must have missed something. Again her eyes darted towards the mysterious figure. There was definitely something familiar in that face. It reminded her of an animal. Beneath the black cloak, she noted, the man was wearing black leather pants, boots high enough to reach the knee, and a wool shirt. No sigil in sight. A very thin sword, the thinnest sword she had ever seen, hung from the belt at his waist. Sansa gasped, realizing who the man was. It was not a man. It was Areo Horseface. How can you possibly be here?" she asked, getting off her chair. She didn't smile like her mother, keeping her hands clasped near her breast. She didn't even advance to hug her. Instead, she unconsciously tried to look like a queen. Last time they had seen each other, Arya and father were leaving to North with an escort of Lannister men. Sansa was a stupid girl then, waving goodbye with a smile on the patio. Sansa wanted to show her sister she was not that girl any longer. "Are you surprised, sister?" She shook her head to get rid of the snowflakes melting in her hair. That was why she looked like a man, realized Sansa. Rosia's hair was cut short as if she had shaved her head recently. With a feline smile in her lips, her sister fell on her knee. "Shall I call you, Your Grace, and all that crap?" A mixture of defiance and mockery sparkled in Aura's eyes. Sansa was taken by surprise with that remark. Fortunately, Catelyn intervened before things got awkward. "Arya, please sit next to the fire. You are shivering," Catelyn demanded, adopting her best motherly voice. "Sansa, dear, can you pour us some wine?" An arrogant thought passed the Queen's mind, even while she moved to obey her mother's request. Sitting in a chair next to the fire, Arya was stretching her hands above the flames. Gladly, she accepted the glass Sansa brought and drank all the wine in 3 long gulps. How ladylike. "I thought you were with your brothers on that reckless errand on the narrow sea." Catelyn started. Tears of happiness at seeing her child still glinted in her eyes. Her hands were on Arya's knees, as if to make sure the girl stayed. Something stirred inside Sansa for a moment. She bit back her lip, realizing that she was actually feeling jealous. How could she feel jealous of Arya? Mother and daughter hadn't seen each other for 6 years. That devotion in Catelyn's eyes was nothing more than a mother's love. Gulping, she turned to a window. Sansa didn't see herself as some selfish and arrogant queen, at least she hadn't until that moment. She wasn't used to sharing her mother. That was it. During all her time at King's Landing, she had relied on Catelyn to become the queen she was today. Arya returning to their lives so suddenly was like a punch in the stomach. "I was with my brothers," Arya confirmed with a crooked smile. "We left Pentos a fortnight or so ago. We stayed there a bit longer than expected because Bran refused to leave before finding a eunuch who could read the future or some shit like that." "I would thank you not to use that kind of language in here," Sansa interrupted, coldly, sipping her wine. Arya flashed an annoyed look in her direction before continuing. "Then we found a vessel that took us to Claw Isle, or is it Crab Isle? Well, the name doesn't really matter. I parted my way with the boys there. Rickon, Bran, and Sir Roderick Castle found a ship bound to White Harbor. And yes, Mother, their ship will not go far from the shore. The sea is getting increasingly dangerous to travel." Catelyn seemed concerned all the same. "And why in seven hells are you here?" she asked sternly. Sansa rolled her eyes. Now even her mother was swearing like a fishwife. "Your brother will not be happy when he learns that you have disrespected his orders. He's used to it by now," she mocked, rubbing her hands. "You haven't answered Mother's question," Sansa interjected. She was starting to grow curious. Why was Arya really here? If she remembered correctly, King's Landing was the place she most hated in the world. Once again, Arya looked at Sansa with mockery. "I'm here to help a friend finish some businesses," she replied, assuming a stern face that made her look so much like father. "Robert's bastard?" Catelyn asked, without making an effort to hide her disappointment. It seemed that somehow her sister was now friend of the boy that father had investigated before his arrest. This boy that somehow had accompanied Arya and father's party to the north had had the intention of taking the Black. However, it seemed he had had second thoughts upon reaching Winterfell and finding a position there as blacksmith. It seemed Robb knew who he truly was, but his true parentage was kept secret. Otherwise, Joff would have the bastard's head. "Yes, the bastard," Arya replied, ignoring her mother's judgment. "He has businesses in the city, and I'm here to accompany him. We got aboard a little merchant vessel that docked here 3 days ago. But don't worry, Mother. We will soon make our way back to Winterfell." 3 days ago, and only now you came to visit your mother? Catelyn was astonished. "See, Mother, that's your lovely daughter," said Sansa to herself. "Well, I wanted to see you earlier, Mother, but no one knows I'm in the city, and I wanted to keep it that way, if possible. So I waited for the right moment to sneak in the keep. And what better time could I find than the funeral of Tywin fucking Lannister?" "Lord, yeah, have some manners," Catelyn reprehended, finally showing her anger. Sansa, however, made a gesture to stop her mother. Without waiting for silence, she asked, "And where have you been hiding all this time?" Rosier shrugged again. "I'm staying in a very nice inn at Flea Bottom. I bet you would like that place, Your Grace." Sansa ignored Arya's bait. "I see you are still a fool, Arya. You think you are here by chance? The Holdfast is one of the safest places in Westeros. Someone let you pass on purpose. Chance? I had a plan, Sansa." For the first time, Arya seemed angry. "A knight I met at the inn yesterday helped me into the kitchens. I think he was a Tyrell. He had a fancy rose on his armor." Catelyn now understood Sansa's reaction. Gripping Arya's hands in hers, she looked to her eldest daughter. "And give my regards to your sister when you see her again." The words of Lady Olenna echoed in her head. That couldn't have been a coincidence, a marriage proposal for Arya, right before the girl turned up at her chamber. Tyrell knights helping her into the keep. "The Queen of Thorns had known Arya was in the city, and she has made a fool of me and make sure I knew she was behind all this." Sneaking Arya in was supposed to look like a Tyrell gift. Could that marriage alliance really mean that the Reach was rising against the Iron Throne and wanted the Starks at their side? Otherwise, what could Olenna possibly gain by directly mocking the Queen? She was not a stupid woman. "Sansa, will you now take me seriously?" Catelyn asked. Arya furrowed her brows, oblivious to what was happening before her arrival. "Yes, Mother," Sansa replied, looking through the window. The funeral procession was now on its way to the Lion Gate, a black mass of people coloring the white streets. The Starks ignored the Lannister column, a dread realization coming to them all. "We must find out what the Tyrells are up to." "Robin?" A month and a half ago, when word arrived that Torrhen's Square had been taken by Euron Greyjoy, Robb had found it hard to believe. How could the Crow's Eyes forces have invaded the north without them knowing? Maester Luwin's message also said that the attack must have happened more than 2 months ago, since the messenger had been lost on his way to Winterfell. Later, more reports reached the Night Fort saying the same, and at last Helman Tallheart came from Queen's Gate to urge him to march south. "We left the north unprotected, my lord," Tallheart had yelled at the Night Fort's hall. He was already prepared to leave the wall, and who could judge him? He wanted to retrieve his home and learn what had happened to his family. But we should have seen it coming. The Iron Men would obviously take advantage of the undefended north while we fought the Wildings. I know we are doing the right thing, being here, my lord. Don't misunderstand me, but how can we protect ourselves if when we are being attacked on two fronts? And the true threat is yet to come, Robb wanted to say. But he instead kept the thoughts to himself. For now that was a truth only known by the Night's Watch and shared like rumors and ghost stories. He had to find out more about what Jon and Father had told him before he could tell his advisors and bannermen about the dead men rising. I have to see them with my own eyes. We'll take back your home and kill Euron Greyjoy, Sir Helman. Robb had assured the older man, shaking those thoughts out of his mind. He had to deal with more important threats at the moment, and even though he longed for his father's guidance, he had to rule alone. Eddard Stark was a few leagues away, back at Castle Black, dealing with more desperate matters. And I'm the Warden of the North now. It was precisely hearing those words in his head that he knew he had to ride to Torrhen Square. Show how the North was strong and how their lord would defend its people when they needed him. He had to show strength. Especially now that the winter had come, and a change of scenery for a month or two would only do him good. Tomorrow, we'll ride south. And so they had left the Night Fort, taking with them a host of 1,000 men. Robb reckoned that they would be enough to lay siege around the castle. Meanwhile, the Night Fort would be left to the care of Roose Bolton. Grey Wind would also stay. His direwolf could sense when there were wildlings climbing the wall, and besides, he was able to fight them himself. For a week they marched untiringly along the snowy roads towards the Wolfswood, and then, following the tree lines deep into the forest. Surprisingly, when the towers of Torrhen Square finally appeared on the horizon, they found out that someone was already besieging the castle. Not Northmen, though. The banners hoisted around the encampment near the lake had a kraken on them. The Krakens have come to fight the Crow, Robb realized with a smile. That meant seeing Theon again. 6 years ago, when he had returned from the Riverlands and assumed his place as Lord of Winterfell, Robb had let Theon return to the Iron Islands. However, a year or so later, Balon Greyjoy was killed and tensions grew on the Iron Islands. After a kingsmoot, Balon's children were put aside and the Iron Men proclaimed Euron Greyjoy, the Crow's Eye, as their king. And so the War of the Ironborn succession had started. The Onion of Aesha, contesting their uncle's right to rule, had rallied an army of supporters, robbed some ships, and started acting as pirates to sabotage Euron's plans. Battles at high sea were constantly reported. News circulated about how more than half of Victarion Greyjoy's Iron Fleet had been sunk. Meanwhile, ships with cargo bound to the Iron Islands were also raided, causing famine and death among the people. These past few had definitely been rough years for the Iron Men. Leon, Robb had called, seeing his friend coming out of tent. The TN greeted him with a cocky smile. He was still handsome, and the years among the Iron Men had given him a more savage look. One of his ears was pierced, for example, and he had grown a wild beard. I suspected you would come yourself. What the fuck were you doing freezing your ass on the wall? Robb told him then about the wildling attacks. He was not surprised to see Theon smirk, as if wildlings weren't in fact a real threat. Later they dined, and his friend told him all he knew about the events that had happened at Torrhen Square. It seemed that just a month or two ago, Euron and Victarion had sailed to the Blazewater Bay with 40 ships, knowing their nephews were far on the reach, dealing with some merchants. They had then gone up through the Salt Spear, until their ships reached the lake by Torrhen Square. And then they attacked, and the castle fell within an hour. Only after that did Euron's men pick up their axes to start cut down trees from the Wolfswood. Timber? That was the reason behind the invasion. Not pillage, murder, or rape like the Iron Men had done many times before. No, Euron wanted timber to rebuild his fleet. But then a twist had turned the game. Victarion had left with all the timber, ships, and the majority of the army. Euron had been left behind with a small garrison that was no defending the castle. What had happened and why Victarion had betrayed Euron was still a mystery. Following the rumors, Theon and Asha had sailed their ships to Blazewater trying to intercept their uncle Victarion, but they had arrived too late. So they sailed to Torrhen Square to fight Euron, who still was lord of the Iron Islands. After trying unsuccessfully to storm the walls, they mounted siege. And here they were. Now is only a matter of time until Euron surrenders, Theon had said confidently. But time passed and Euron resisted. In fact, he seemed to be doing his best. 8 archers were constantly on the battlements, ready to fire arrows if anyone came near the gates. Besides those men, they didn't see anyone else. The castle, being of solid rock and having high walls, was difficult to breach. So they continued to wait, their eyes constantly at Torrhen Square, waiting for something to change. He has provisions to endure at least 1 more year. Tallheart told them during the 3rd week of the siege. Robb had already sent a messenger asking for reinforcements. If Euron did not accept the defeat in 2 weeks, they would have to attack the castle. But he is not prepared for the cold. He'll surrender. I hope you are right, Asha Greyjoy replied, growing impatient. The Theon sister had been an agreeable surprise. Robb had heard about her and how she commanded her own ship, Black Wind. And she didn't look bad. She was a lean and long-legged woman, with black hair cut short, wind-chafed skin, and strong hands. That was why Robb welcomed her into his bed when she started looking for a way to pass the time. Only then did Robb understand how he longed for a woman's touch after spending those cold nights at the Night Fort alone. Asha, being tempered with iron and salt, knew how to make him feel alive and forget the wall for a few hours. Theon obviously had laughed when he had realized his best friend was sleeping with his sister. I see you finally don't care about all that crap your father used to say, Theon said teasingly. You've grown up. Robb had been used to sleeping with other women for a few years now. However, his men never dared to comment on his deviations, much less with Theon's audacity. Hearing those words coming from his friend's lips made him feel slightly guilty for his actions. Yes, father had always taught him about honor and how one day he should be loyal to his wife. But Robb couldn't heed those words any longer. He simply couldn't. 5 years married to Marissa Frey, and he always felt something crumble inside him whenever he thought of her. They didn't love each other like his father still loved his mother. They never would. Yes, it was a better arrangement than the one Sansa had to endure. But nonetheless, it was a burden, how his wife wept every time he entered her, how she passed her days by the fire, shivering with cold, and how she couldn't tolerate his brother's or Arya's lack of womanly decency, as she called it. And up until now, she had not even been able to give him an heir. It's hard to explain, Robb said. He hated talking about Myrcella. Fear not, Robb, Theon winked. I'm glad for you. If she wasn't my sister, I would fuck her too. Finally, at the end of the 4th week, the siege of Torrhen Square came to an unexpected end, when someone in the castle opened the gates. Ready to fight, Robb had personally led an army into the castle. But a fight was not waiting for them inside, only chaos, death, and destruction. Dozens of men were dead in the courtyard, buried beneath a cloak of snow. The blood was still fresh. It seemed a fight had broken between Euron's men, the ones who wanted to continue the siege, and the ones who wanted to end it. The survivors didn't offer resistance. In fact, they put aside their swords to surrender willingly. Where's my uncle? Theon demanded, after accepting the soldiers' surrender. Theon was acting surprisingly well, Robb noted gladly, letting his friend decide the fate of his uncle's soldiers. Asha, on the other hand, seemed uneasy, and Robb knew why. As soon as the Iron Succession War was over, Balon's heirs would return to the Iron Islands and confront another Kingsmote. Which of them would take the Seastone chair? Robb didn't actually know. A few years ago, Asha had the best chance, but now that Theon had proved himself fighting against his uncles, he was a strong contender. Euron is on the watchtower, one of the men replied, taking a step towards them. He has not come out since Victarion left. Theon grinned, a victorious smile already settling on his lips. Let's find the old crow then. Asha stopped him, holding his arm. We need him alive, Theon, she whispered, loud enough for Robb to hear. The Orn's brow furrowed. And why is that? He might know where Victarion is. Theon agreed absently, without really hearing. His eyes were focused on the men thrashing down the watchtower's door. When it fell, leaving the path open to the spiraled staircase, Theon advanced immediately, followed by Asha, Robb, and Tallheart. An escort of 5 Greyjoy soldiers accompanied them for precaution. As they climbed the steps, Robb stared at Theon again. Soon he would meet a strong ally at his side. Someone to help him protect the North from threats that were still to come. Not a person willing to attack his lands while he was fighting on the wall. Theon was his friend and a good fighter, but was he really fitted to rule, to handle the Ironman's lust for plunder and rape, and could he grasp the disparate strings of power? They would soon find out. They found Euron atop the tower in Tallheart's old chambers without a guard to protect him, and having as his only company a mysterious girl. He was lying on the bed, covered in furs, but shivering nonetheless. His long dark hair was spread on the pillow, taking the form of a kraken. Suddenly, at the candle's flickering light, Aisha gasped, and a manic smile grew on Theon's lips. Euron Greyjoy was called Crow's Eye because he had lost his left eye long ago. Robin had heard that the wound was usually covered with a patch, but the patch was gone. So was his right eye. Someone had blinded Euron. He was clearly sick, probably of infection. His eye socket was festering, completely infected, burning with fever. His skin was marked with purple bruises, as if someone had beaten him recently. Hearing footsteps, the man moved between the pillows. "Who is there?" he asked with a raspy voice, the words painful to the ear. "Girl, who is it? What's happening?" The girl, sitting in a chair by the bedside, looked at them with silence. She had a round, flat face, dusky skin, and eyes like molten gold. According to Asha's spies at Pike, she was a sorceress given as a gift by Victarion to Euron. To Robb, she seemed only a small, fragile girl, wrapped in a fur too large for her body and clutching a book to her chest, as if that alone was enough to defend herself. It looked like she had been reading to Euron. "It's us, Uncle." Euron stopped moving, recognizing Theon's voice. A grim smile settled on his lips. "So my last men have betrayed me, he muttered, with a sigh. "Well, are you proud, boy?" "You have lost, Uncle," Theon said, excited, approaching the crippled man on the bed. He and Asha were the only ones still wielding their swords, as if the Crow's Eye was still a threat. Theon's sword lowered to rest on his uncle's throat. "Do you surrender?" At Robb's side, Asha stirred, her hands tightening on the handle of her sword. "Surrender?" Euron spat. "I don't know the meaning of that word." "Oh, I can show you what it means," Theon snarled, his sword pressing against his uncle's skin without piercing it. Euron laughed again, as if he thought he could joke his way out of this. "Show me?" "No, I don't think you can. I don't have my eye anymore, do I? Don't play games with me." "You are proud of yourself, boy?" Euron asked again, interrupting him. A condescending smile was on his mouth again. "If you are, you shouldn't be." "I shouldn't?" Theon asked mockingly. "Why, Uncle? I've won, and you've lost. It seems to me that I have plenty of reasons to be proud of myself." "You think you have won?" "Oh, no, nephew, you haven't. We both lost spineless, stupid Victarion," he said. "He did this to me, you see, and then he took my men, he took my ships, and he left me here to rot. I tried to survive, to resist your bloody siege. And believe me, I would have resisted until the long night came again, if only my men had the balls. But I didn't, and now you'll kill me. But surrender? I will never surrender. Never. You asking that stupid question only proves that you're dead inside. Hollow. A shame to our house. You can have the Greyjoy name, and even our blood in your veins. But you don't know what it is to pay the iron price. The Iron Islands will never reach glory if they fall into your hands. You'll always be a little wolf pup. Your father knew that. Even your sister knows it." Asha exchanged a glance with Robb. "I'm not a wolf pup," Theon growled, losing the smirk on his lips. "I'm not a fucking wolf pup." The on-sword sank into Euron's throat. The dusky girl screamed as a gush of warm blood spilled onto the soiled linen and the floor. Blood spattered upon Theon's face, streaming along his nose and towards his lips. He failed, Robb thought bitterly, keeping his words to himself. To win that war, the Greyjoys needed Euron to find Victarion. Now it was too late. With a gurgling noise, more blood flowed to the bed. The proclaimed king of the Iron Islands quivered one last time, his chuckle stopping and his chest juddering to a halt. "This is what you've bought with your iron, uncle?" Theon said, snatching the sword out of Euron's throat, breaking a bone on the way. Then he took out his cock to piss on his uncle's body. And he fails again. There he was. The same immature boy who thought it funny to kick the head from a beheaded man. Robb was so lost in thought that he didn't see Asha taking a step further. "It seems you have done enough, brother." A swift gesture later, she smashed the pommel of her sword against Theon's skull. With a smacking sound, he immediately fell to his knees, his cock still out of his trousers. He was unconscious by the time he hit on the floor. With an angry look in her eyes, Yasha sheathed her sword. "That was not necessary, Asha," Robb said, instinctively. But she was not listening to him. Ignoring the girl who was now crying, Asha sat on the bed at her uncle's feet. Her eyes stared at the dead, mutilated man with something more than hatred. Pity. He shouldn't have died this way, she said, after a short moment. Her words surprised Robb. After all, this was the man who had killed her father, stolen her crown, and rallied the Iron Islands against her. But she respects him, Robb realized. Euron had also been brave enough to lead his own army and to die for a cause he believed in without surrender. That was something he knew Asha could respect. "Shall we leave you alone for a while?" Robb asked, taking a step back. This was a family matter now, and neither he nor Master Hellman were Greyjoys. "Yes, please," she said, her lips becoming a thin line. She nodded towards the crying girl. "And take her, please. We'll interrogate her later." And so they left the Greyjoys, one dead, one passed out in his own piss, and the other deciding what to do next. The next hours were passed trying to restore the castle to its former condition. Every Iron Man who had surrendered was taken to the castle cells, where Tallheart's wife, daughter, and brother were found ailing but alive, along with some other inhabitants of Torrance Square. Letting Hellman take care of his family, Robb assumed control of the castle. He started giving orders to hoist down Euron's banner, a red eye with a black pupil beneath a black iron crown, supported by 2 crows from the watchtower, to be replaced by a flag with Tallheart's 3 green sentinel trees over a brown field. Afterwards, he ordered his men to pile up outside all the dead bodies they could find. By nightfall, a great fire was burning in the courtyard, turning dead flesh into gray ashes. Fire, Jon had told him a while ago. That's how we kill the whites. Nothing else stops them. Robb shivered, watching the flames. "My lord, a room was prepared for you in the keep," his squire Hard Ashwood said, appearing that moment. "A hot bath is waiting for you already." "A hot bath," Robb repeated, taking his eyes out of the fire. "When was the last time I took a hot bath?" Giving a last command to his guards to make sure a feast was prepared in the great hall later, he left for his chambers. The room stood in the middle of the watchtower. The furniture was quite simple, a wide, strong bed, a long brown carpet on the floor, and a table with 2 chairs next to a fireplace. It was a palace compared to the wet and muddy tent where he had been sleeping in the last weeks. As promised, a wooden tub filled with hot water was waiting for him, the steam making strange shapes in the cold air. Quickly getting out of his armor, he got into the tub, his muscles relaxing as soon as the warm water touched his skin. "7 hells, how I miss this," Robb whispered, closing his eyes and feeling all the dirt and soot leaving his skin. Even from the start, he had known that ruling the North would not be an easy task, but no one had prepared him for a winter with worse things than snow and wind. 3 years ago, the Night's Watch had called for help when the wildlings started to march south. Following orders coming from the late king beyond the wall, the free folk had left their villages and began to climb the wall. Since the Night's Watch did not have enough men to garrison the 100 leagues between Westwatch by the bridge and Eastwatch by the sea, Robb had had no other choice but to march with his Barrowmen to help Lord Commander Marsh defend the north. None of the other great houses of Westeros showed any kind of support, and none replied to the call of distress sent by the Night's Watch. The king's only answer had been a single cart with prisoners found in the black cells.
Thank you for listening to the story. If you enjoyed this reimagined story and audiobook style presentation, feel free to like and subscribe for more content like this. New stories and alternate scenarios are updated regularly. Now see you in the next video.